All right, welcome everybody to this talk here on the Open Mainframe Project, where we dig into the collaboration and growth of the open source ecosystem around the mainframe through the Open Mainframe Project. And I always like to start this talk off by trying to really get into really what a mainframe is and also kind of breaking some of the myths. When I say the word mainframe to an average person, oftentimes they think of something like this. Another scenario is if you go to Disney World and you go to Epcot, there's an entry in the spaceship Earth that has something very similar to this. So even when I mention this to my kids, they say, oh, this is a mainframe. Well, the reality is this might have been once a mainframe. This is not what the mainframe of today is. The mainframe of today is one of the most highest performant computing architectures on the planet. Just looking at some of the specs here, it has the highest, fastest production CPUs. It uses not RAM, but random access independent memory. And it's really designed for a very high workload environment. It's heavily optimized from the hardware up. Every little bit of it is designed that this is a box that if you need to be as performant as possible while being as secure and scalable and with the most uptime, this is the box that does it. This is the only one that does it. If you need all those up at 11, this is the only box that can do that for you. And what's really cool is it runs Linux and open source on it. But when you think about this box, everyone thinks of, okay, well, great, mainframe, very powerful computer, fantastic. How does it impact me? Every one of these sectors are backed by a mainframe. And if you look at every single one of these sectors, they are critical to our society. They're not just important things. They're not just really helpful things. They are critical. Banking transactions are only, if you go use your credit card anywhere, that is thanks to a mainframe. If you get on an airplane, or at least in the days when you used to do that, that is all thanks to an airplane. The healthcare system background is, based on a mainframe. And even getting to some more specific examples, ADP, which is one of the Open Mainframe Project members, they're probably your payroll processor. They're probably people that help make your paychecks happen. That is all thanks to a mainframe as well. So it really becomes a very critical part of where our society is. Now, as I mentioned, we have open source is on the mainframe, and it has its roots really going back to the early days of mainframe with an event called Share. And, if us in open source circles, when we talk about the roots of the open source movement, we trace it back to Share, where mainframe operators and programmers would get together and they would share code back and forth with one another. And this helped really the mainframe take off in its early days because these were really complicated machines. It was hard to get started with them. The idea is that you had a community of people you could share source code with helped really jumpstart that industry quite a bit. We fast forward quite a bit here to 1999 when we had Linux first ported as a community effort from Marist University and other enthusiasts to the mainframe. And this is, again, the very early days of Linux really becoming a center stage. It's already coming to the mainframe. And great vendors like SUSE jumping on board right after that to support this with customers. SUSE was the lead in here. They're the first one that came out to market, but then others soon followed behind. And even SUSE to this day is really critical in the mainframe area. And that has just grown and grown and grown. Customers, the ecosystem grows, all great things. What becomes really interesting is as a open source community grows, it often will hit a little bit of a ceiling. This is something we see across a number of different verticals. We see a number of different communities and technology spaces where the growth ends up having a lot of ebbs and flows and a lot of sporadicness and just a lot of disconnectedness. So there's not really that shared hub. Everything is very very industry specific, vendor specific. enterprises and folks in the space are really struggling of how they engage with the upstream community. So they might have got the first port going, but how can they keep that sustainable? And really what the reality is here is you get to a point in an ecosystem's development where the next way to grow it is to bring in that neutral party, that neutral home. And back in 2015, that became the Open Mainframe Project. And it was really as a part of a double down from IBM on driving more Linux on the platform as they announced Linux One boxes and an effort for really bringing this code over. And this has just really taken off. Some of the early focus has been around interns who have made contributions to many, many open source projects, including Cloud Foundry, and many of the SUSE build system projects, which is the thanks of folks at SUSE for collaborating with them. And even from there, we've spent a lot of time of developing out an area where mainframe-centric open source projects have a home to live. And we started that really in 2018 with the launch of Zoe, which really focuses on ZOS enablement with modern application stacks and APIs, but then grew to a lot of different angles. The Amidus project, which is focusing on porting things, porting general open source to the mainframe. Feilong, which I have Mike Friesenegger who would touch on here in a moment, and a number of other efforts. Very mainframe specific open source, but really, really critical to help bringing this community together to drive forward. So what's this mission of this project? It's very simple. Build that community and adoption of open source in the mainframe. That's the end game here. And the project does that through three key ways. One is eliminating those barriers, helping get access to hardware, helping ensure that open source software can easily run on the mainframe, helping educate around what open source is to the mainframe community. Second is demonstrating the value of the mainframe on the technical and business levels. And we do a ton of advocacy with through just our projects alone who are transforming their organizations because of the modern open source that's happening on the mainframe and how that is impacting their business overall. And I think third, which is really the thing that sets up all the rest of this, is the strengthening the collaboration points. That's what an open source project, that's an open source foundation is here to do, is to create those collaboration spaces that are independent of vendors, that are independent of locales, backgrounds, to really help a thriving community. And that's something we've started to see quite a bit. So we talked about hosting projects today. We host 10, actually there's 2 projects missing from here that don't have their logos yet. So we're actually hosting 12 different open source community projects all across the board, from Linux on Z, ZVM, ZOS, and then tooling that even spans multiples of them. All of our projects are open to the community to participate in. All OSI licensed, all areas that anybody can really get involved with. You can learn more at openmainframeproject.org/projects. And I really want to touch on the Feilong project, but I really would like the TSC co-chair of that project to really step in here. So we have Mike Friesenegger from SUSE here to dig into this more.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Appreciate that awesome introduction. So let me tell everybody a little bit about the Feilong project. And what we're really focused on is contributing and further developing the Python ZVM SDK codebase, which IBM contributed to the Linux Foundation and to the Open Mainframe Project. And what this Python ZVM SDK codebase does is it's a RESTful API implementation that simplifies the interaction of working with the IBM ZVM hypervisor. The ZVM hypervisor has been around for many, many years, since the 60s. There's a lot of great technology built into that hypervisor, but it's not as easy to work with because it doesn't have a web-based interface and things like that. With Feilong, now developers and people that understand RESTful APIs. They can work with it, they can develop against it, and they can do infrastructure as a service automation to create virtual machines, to define networks, to connect storage to the virtual machines, all the things that are being managed by the ZVM hypervisor. The Python ZVM SDK is the actual name of the project, but it's also known as the ZVM Cloud Connector if you read and check out the documentation. And what's really cool is it's already being used by a number of commercial products as well as open source projects within their code base. So people are already taking advantage of it. Organizations are already contributing to the project. So the Feilong team, we're working hard on a number of projects to make it easier for the community to continue to contribute. First of all, we're in the process of moving the CI/CD infrastructure to the Linux Foundation, and we're connecting Z resources that are being contributed by member organizations for running the CI/CD infrastructure, for building and testing, all the building and testing that is done by CI/CD. We're also making it easier for developers to contribute. We're giving developers access to ZVM systems so that they can test their code, they can develop, they can document, and then ultimately contribute back to the Feilong project. So in closing, you know, as the co-chair for the Feilong project, I'd love to be able to see the membership grow, see the number of people that attend our biweekly meetings grow. We are currently around 40 people strong, communicating on Slack and growing. So I encourage those that are interested to find us and ask questions to learn more. So thank you, and now back to you, John.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Mike. I think this has been a really great collaboration project where we've seen, you know, vendors like IBM and with the leadership of SUSE coming in here, but then we've also seen business partners globally that are starting to get involved with this, along with, you know, folks from an academic perspective as well. So this has really been a great example of this community coming together to help improve an open source project. Because again, when it was first released, it was released under open source, but it was really hard for people to get engaged, really hard for people to contribute, brought under a vendor neutral entity. Now all of a sudden that starts to flourish. And we see so many examples of this over and over and over again.
Yep, we love it.
It's great. It's great. We're all open source here. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. You know, the key part of the mainframe industry, which I really love, is they're thinking ahead of what does mainframe look like? You know, mainframes, you know, as we know it here, you know, 60 years old. What do the next 60 years look like? How do we get to that next 60 years? And, you know, it means it's handing it off to the next generation. It's helping enabling those modern use cases. And one of the early tenets of this project was let's establish that mentorship and academic engagement to fulfill that. And the first real big initiative this project put into gear was a summer mentorship program. And we've done that year. We're into our 5th year of doing that now. We've hit, you know, over 40 mentees sponsored over this time. We have nearly 20 global academic institutions that are help supporting this through helping get their students involved, or even in some cases, taking this mentorship program and bringing it into class study, self-study capstone programs. And it's made numerous impacts and has actually also impacted students globally. You know, and just from a SUSE angle here, they've made numerous contributions to Cloud Foundry. They've made numerous contributions to the SUSE builds environments. And I think this also summer we're seeing some contributions within the Feilong space as well. So this is really an exciting area here, and I think for me personally is always the most rewarding area to participate in, and just see this next generation come here and get engaged in the mainframe and just really, really excited. And with that, it sort of strikes as, wow, there's a story of who a mainframer is. So without a doubt, if I say the term, who's the person that's running a mainframe, who's the person that's operating this mainframe, they might think of somebody later in their career, most likely male. And that's not really the true mainframer of today is. And so we started a podcast series a few years ago called I Am a Mainframer, where we dug into that. And we interview people, young, old, diverse from a gender, background, racial, wherever they're coming from perspective, just to showcase of how they got into the mainframe, how this has impacted their lives and their careers, and where do they see this whole thing going? It's up on all of your favorite, you can read and listen to it. We have them up on our blog. It's also available in your favorite podcast client. I encourage you to check it out. Listen, I sat and listen to these things as they come out, and they're just fantastic, and they're really just very uplifting to understand what truly is happening in this space. So momentum-wise, we are 5 years this summer into this project, which is a great milestone considering when launched we were at about a dozen organizations, and now we're hitting into that 40 area here. We're growing our hosted projects. We initially started with one seed project, and now we'll be at a dozen, and we're just impacting students, mentees, and we're just bringing a huge amount of contributors to all of our open source projects here. And many of these contributors are folks that may have never contributed to open source, but now they are because of this project. And another thing I really encourage you all to take a look at is what is the broad landscape of open source in the mainframe. We put this together, and if you're familiar with the cloud native landscape, it's a similar technology on the back end here. But this here is a view of what does the broader landscape around open source in the mainframe look like, from a project perspective, from a Linux distribution perspective, from broad open source projects that are supported, from looking at the Zoe ecosystem and what that downstream commercial ecosystem is looking like, and just the companies that are behind supporting this effort. Check this out, l.openmainframeproject.org, and share this and contribute to this. This landscape is an open source project in and of itself. So if you know of projects out there that are mainframe centric that we're not addressing, you can do a pull request and get it added in there. We really love to build this out. Tons of ways to get involved in this project from a community, perspective, any of the shared open source projects. And if your organization is really keen on the mainframe and it's an important thing for their long-term technology goals, we do have corporate sponsorship opportunities available, which give you an opportunity to show that stewardship within the community and be one of those almost 40 organizations that is showing that this is an important thing for them. So if you're interested in learning more, we got a few resources here. You can check out our website, and you could subscribe to our newsletter. We send it out about monthly, every other month, of just updates and what's happening in the project. Talked about membership opportunities. You can go right now to the website, openmainframeproject.org/about/join. You can also email us at our membership email alias, and if you have questions. And then if you're ready to pursue it, you can do that all online. And then always, after you view this recording, hit me up. Talk to me. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have around the project or how to get involved. With that, I want to thank you all for your time here. I hope you're enjoying your SUSECON Digital experience, and I hope you all are safe, healthy, and well. Thank you.